A pair of glasses lay broken on the concrete under a streetlight at 11:47 at night. One lens cracked clean through. The frame bent at an angle that metal is not supposed to hold. 2 feet away, a man was on the ground, not moving, blood pooling slowly from behind his head, spreading in a shape that had no intention of stopping. A woman was kneeling beside him. She did not know his name. She did not live in this neighborhood. She had been waiting for a bus home after a night shift. She could have walked away. She did not walk away. Rochelle Washington had finished her shift at 11:22 that night, 12 hours on her feet in the geriatric ward at Temple University Hospital. She had changed linens for 14 patients. She had turned a 91-year-old man onto his side every 2 hours so his skin would not break down in the places where bone pressed against mattress. She had cleaned a wound on a woman's ankle that the day shift had dressed wrong and said nothing about it to anyone because saying something meant paperwork, and paperwork meant staying an extra 40 minutes she could not afford. She clocked out. She changed her shoes in the locker room. She walked 6 blocks east to the bus stop on Germantown Avenue because that was the stop where the Route 23 still ran at 11:40. The other stop, the closer one, had been cut from the night schedule 7 months ago. Nobody had explained why. Nobody had to. The bench at the stop was metal, cold in November. She sat down. The laundromat behind her had been closed since August. Its sign still hung above the door, but the lights inside had not come on in 3 months. Across the street, a check-cashing place with bars on the windows. Next to it, a parking lot for a building that no longer existed. She heard the sound before she understood it. Not a voice, not a shout, a rhythm. Shoe soles hitting concrete, repeated, steady, the way you hear a sound and your body knows what it means before your brain has finished translating it into language. She stood up. She looked across the parking lot. 3 men, 1 man on the ground. The 3 were above him, their arms moving in a rhythm that matched the sound. Mechanical, practiced. The man on the ground was not moving anymore, but they had not stopped. Rochelle did not make a decision. Her legs moved. Her voice came out before she had chosen the words. She shouted something. She did not remember afterward what it was. She was already running toward them. Not because she was brave. Because the distance between her body and what was happening closed before her mind caught up to tell her to stay where she was. They looked up. One of them looked directly at her. She saw his face under the streetlight for less than 3 seconds. Then they ran. All 3. East. Into the dark between 2 buildings where there were no lights, and no cameras, and no reason for anyone to look. She reached the man on the ground. His eyes were open. They were not seeing anything. Blood behind his head, slow, spreading in a shape that had no edges. His left cheekbone was wrong, displaced. She could see it even in the dim light because she had spent 4 years looking at bodies, and she knew what bone looked like when it was not where it was supposed to be. She knelt beside him. She did not touch his head. She stabilized his neck with both hands the way she had been trained. She said, "Stay with me." He did not answer. His breathing was shallow, uneven. The kind of breathing that meant something inside was not working the way it should. She called 911. She gave the address. She gave the cross street. She described the injuries. She described the 3 men. Heights, builds. One wore a dark jacket with a stripe down the left arm. One had a limp when he ran. The third was the one who had looked at her. The ambulance arrived 9 minutes later. The police arrived 14 minutes after that. She stayed. She answered every question. She gave them her full name, her phone number, her address. She spelled it out for the officer who wrote it down in handwriting she could not read upside down. She did not ask the man's name. She did not ask what he did or where he lived or why 3 men had beaten him in a parking lot at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in November. She did not need to know any of those things to do what she had already done. Before the paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher, she saw the glasses, 6 feet from where his head had been. One lens cracked through the center. The frame bent at the bridge, where it had been stepped on. She picked them up. She put them in her coat pocket. She did not know why. She just did. The ambulance left. The police left. Rochelle stood alone in the parking lot for 2 minutes. Then she walked back to the bus stop. She sat down on the cold metal bench. She waited for the 11:58. It came 4 minutes late. She got on. She rode home. She did not sleep. Rochelle Washington was 33 years old. She had been a certified nursing assistant for 6 years. She worked the night shift at Temple 5 nights a week. On Saturdays and Sundays, she cleaned houses in Chestnut Hill for a woman named Mrs. Adler, who left the payment in an envelope on the kitchen counter and never spoke to her directly. Between both jobs, she earned enough to cover rent, food, Kendrick's school supplies, and her mother's blood pressure medication. Enough was not a feeling. Enough was a number she checked against the bills every second Thursday, and either it cleared or it did not. Most months, it cleared. Some months, she moved the electric bill to the following cycle and hoped the grace period held. The apartment was on the second floor of a brick building on Westmoreland Street. 2 bedrooms. Kendrick slept in the back bedroom. It was small. The window faced a wall, but it was his. He had a desk in there that Rochelle had found on the curb 3 blocks away and carried home by herself because it had all 4 legs and a drawer that still closed. Odessa slept in the front bedroom. She was 64. High blood pressure, arthritis in both knees that got worse in the cold and did not improve in the warmth. She had moved in with Rochelle 2 years ago when the rent on her own apartment in Nicetown went up by $300 in a single month, and she could not make the difference. Rochelle slept on the sofa. She had rearranged the cushions into something that held her weight without sagging in the middle. Every night, she made it into a bed. Every morning, she folded the blanket, stacked the pillows, and returned the sofa to its daytime shape. Before Kendrick woke up, she had been doing this for 2 years. Kendrick had never once seen his mother sleeping on a sofa. He believed she slept in the front room with his grandmother. Rochelle had never corrected him. She did not intend to. Her schedule had not changed in 3 years. She came home from the hospital at 6:15 in the morning. She made breakfast, eggs if there were eggs, oatmeal if there were not. She packed Kendrick's lunch in a brown bag with his name written on it in marker because he had asked her to do that once, and she had not stopped. She walked him to school by 7:30. She came home. She slept from 8 until 1. She woke up. She cleaned houses from 2 to 5. She picked Kendrick up at 5:30. She cooked dinner. She sat with him while he did homework. She checked his math because math was the one subject she trusted herself to check. She bathed him. She read to him until 9. Then she left for the night shift at 10:15. Every day. The same day. She did not complain about it. Not because she had made peace with it. Because complaining required time she did not have and energy that was already allocated. Kendrick was 8. He was good at math. He was better at asking questions that adults were not ready to answer. He had once asked Rochelle why some people lived in houses and some people lived in cars, and whether the people in the cars had done something wrong. She had not answered right away. She had thought about it for the rest of the night shift and still did not have an answer she believed. His backpack had a broken zipper. The pull tab had come off 3 months ago. Rochelle had repaired it with surgical thread from the hospital, 2 clean stitches through the nylon, strong enough to hold. She knew the thread was meant for skin. She had used it on a backpack. She did not think about that often. It was what she had. Odessa was the reason Rochelle could work nights. She was the one who slept in the room next to Kendrick. She was the one who got up if he had a nightmare. She was the one who checked the locks. She was the one who made sure the apartment was still standing every morning when Rochelle came home. She was also the one who would be the first to beg Rochelle to take back her testimony. But that had not happened yet. Adrian Clark was admitted to Temple University Hospital at 12:19 in the morning. He arrived by ambulance. He was unconscious by the time the paramedics transferred him to the emergency department. The intake form listed his injuries: 4 fractured ribs, a partially collapsed lung, a fractured cheekbone, mild traumatic brain injury consistent with repeated blunt force to the head. He was intubated within 8 minutes of arrival. Surgery lasted 3 hours and 11 minutes. The police cataloged what they found on his person. A wallet. Inside the wallet, $23 in cash. A monthly transit pass for SEPTA valid through the end of November. No driver's license. No credit cards. An employee identification card. The card had his photograph on it, his name, and the name of an organization printed in small blue letters along the bottom: Westbrook Legal Aid Clinic. There was a single key on a key ring with nothing else attached to it. No car fob, no gym tag, no bottle opener or miniature flashlight or any of the small accumulations that people collect on a key ring over years of living. One key. One lock somewhere in the city that had opened. That was all. His briefcase was found 5 meters from where his body had been. The leather strap was torn. It had been pulled from his hand or his shoulder with enough force to break the hardware. Inside the briefcase, the police found a file, approximately 200 pages, tabbed, highlighted, annotated in handwriting so small it looked like code. They bagged it as evidence. No one opened it that night. No one read what was inside. No one came for Adrian Clark in the first 48 hours. The hospital called the emergency contact listed in his intake form. The number had been disconnected. They called Westbrook Legal Aid Clinic. The phone rang 11 times. No one answered. The clinic was a one-person operation. The one person was lying in a hospital bed on the 4th floor with a tube in his throat. No wife came. No brother. No friend who had been waiting for a call that did not come. The nurses changed his IV bags. The monitors beeped. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when there is no one to be quiet for. The night nurse on the ICU floor that week was a woman named Patrice. She had worked at Temple for 9 years. She had worked beside Rochelle for 4 of those years. She recognized the patient the moment the chart came up. Not his name, his face, the bruising, the cheekbone. The same man Rochelle had been kneeling beside in the parking lot 6 hours earlier. Patrice sent a message to Rochelle at 3 in the morning. The man from the parking lot is here. He is in ICU. No one has come for him. Rochelle read the message lying on the sofa in the dark. The blanket pulled up to her shoulders. Kendrick asleep in the back room. Odessa breathing slow and even through the thin wall. She read it twice. She did not reply. She put the phone face down on the carpet beside the sofa. She lay there in the dark and thought about the glasses in the pocket of her coat hanging on the hook by the front door. One lens cracked. The frame bent where someone had stepped on it. She did not know his name yet. She did not know what the file in his briefcase contained. She did not know that the organization on his ID card had spent 12 years building a case that would explain everything about why 3 men had beaten him in a parking lot and why no one could be allowed to testify about it. She just lay in the dark and thought about a pair of broken glasses and a man whose emergency contact number no longer worked. Detective Brenda Holloway knocked on Rochelle's door on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after the assault. Holloway was 50 years old, 22 years with the Philadelphia Police Department. She had investigated enough violent crimes to know the difference between a case that would close and a case that would stay open until the folder wore soft at the edges, and someone eventually filed it in a cabinet that no one reopened. This case was heading for the cabinet. Rochelle opened the door. She was still wearing the clothes she had cleaned houses in that afternoon. Kendrick was behind her at the kitchen table, homework spread out in front of him. Odessa was in the front room. The television was on, but she was not watching it. Holloway identified herself. She asked if they could speak privately. Rochelle looked back at Kendrick. Then she stepped into the kitchen and pulled the door halfway closed. Not all the way, halfway. Enough to muffle the conversation. Not enough to lose sight of her son. Holloway sat at the kitchen table across from Rochelle. She placed a folder on the table but did not open it. She explained the situation in the order she always explained it. The security camera at the parking lot had been inoperative for 3 months. The owner of the laundromat had been notified twice. He had not repaired it. There were no other functioning cameras within range of the scene. 2 residents in the apartment building across the street had admitted to seeing parts of the assault from their windows. Both had declined to provide formal statements. One said he did not want to get involved. The other said, She had not seen enough to be useful. Holloway did not believe the second one, but she could not compel cooperation. Rochelle was the only witness, the only person who had been present, the only person who had seen the attackers, the only person who had provided descriptions, the only person who had stayed. Holloway asked if Rochelle would be willing to give a sworn statement. She explained that if the case went to trial, and there was reason to believe it would, Rochelle would be asked to testify in person. In a courtroom, under oath, in front of the defendants. Quote, Rochelle did not pause. She did not ask for time to think about it. She did not ask what it would cost her. She asked one question. What do you need from me? Not, why should I do this? Not what happens if I do. What do you need from me? As if the answer had been settled before the question arrived, Holloway told her. A sworn deposition, a formal identification from photographs, availability for trial preparation, appearance in court if and when the case reached that stage. Rochelle nodded. She said yes. Holloway wrote it down. Before she left, Holloway paused at the door. She said something she was required to say in cases like this. In her experience, she said, assaults of this nature sometimes involved parties beyond the immediate perpetrators. When that was the case, witnesses occasionally experienced pressure. She did not elaborate on what pressure meant. She said it the way someone reads a safety card on an airplane. Flat, procedural. She left her direct phone number on a card beside the salt shaker on the kitchen table. Rochelle closed the door. She turned around. Odessa was standing in the hallway. She had not been watching television. She had been standing there the entire time, listening to every word through the halfway open kitchen door. She looked at Rochelle. Rochelle looked at her. Neither of them spoke. The apartment was quiet, except for the sound of Kendrick turning a page in his math workbook in the other room. Odessa's face held something that was not yet fear, not yet anger, something closer to recognition. The look of a woman who had lived long enough to know what certain decisions cost and who had watched the people she loved pay those costs before. She turned and walked back into the front room. She sat down. She picked up the remote. She did not turn the volume up. Rochelle stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went into the kitchen and finished making dinner. The house Rochelle grew up in was on Gavin Street in North Philadelphia, a brick row house with a green door that her father repainted every spring because he believed the color of a front door told the neighborhood what kind of people lived behind it. Bernard Washington had lived behind that green door for 22 years. He had raised Rochelle behind it. He had buried his wife from it. And he had walked 4 blocks from it every morning at 6:30 to open the barbershop he had built with 14 years of his life. Washington's. That was the name on the sign, hand-painted on a wooden board that Bernard had sanded and stained himself. The shop was on the corner of Gavin and Clearfield. 1 chair when he started, 2 chairs by year 3, 3 chairs by year 6. He never added a 4th. 3 was enough. 3 meant he could see every customer from where he stood. 3 meant he knew every head that sat down and every story that came with it. The shop was not just a barber shop. It was the room where the neighborhood talked. Men came in on Saturdays and stayed 2 hours past their haircut because Bernard had that kind of chair. The kind you did not want to get out of. He kept books on a shelf by the window. Thick ones. History, architecture, city planning. He read them after closing, while the floor was still covered in hair and the radio played low in the corner. He wanted to expand. A second room. More chairs. Maybe a shoe shine station the way his uncle's shop had one in Baltimore when Bernard was a boy. He needed capital. The bank said no. They did not say why. They did not have to. A man named Lester Gaines offered him a loan. Lester was a local investor. He wore good suits. He shook hands firmly. He had helped 3 other businesses on Gavin Street with startup money. Bernard trusted him because the men in the other shops trusted him. That was how trust worked on that street. It moved from handshake to handshake. The terms were manageable, until they were not. The recession hit in 2008. Customers came less often. Tips dropped. He sent people. On a night in October, Rochelle was 12 years old. She was in her bedroom on the second floor. She heard something outside. Not voices, a sound. Shoe soles on concrete, rhythmic, repeated. She went to the window. 3 men. Her father on the ground in front of the green door. The sound was the same sound she would hear 21 years later from a bus stop on Germantown Avenue. Exactly the same. Shoes on pavement. Deliberate. Unhurried. She screamed from the window. They looked up. They left. But something in her father's spine did not leave with them. It stayed. It would stay for 19 years. The neighbors had been home. The lights had been on in 4 houses on that block. Nobody came outside. Nobody called the police. Nobody said they had seen anything. When the officers arrived and knocked on doors the next morning, every answer was the same. I was asleep. I did not hear anything. I cannot help you. Nobody testified. Nobody came forward. Nobody stood up in a room and said I was there and this is what I saw. The case was filed. It was never closed because it was never pursued. No one was arrested. Not that night. Not any night after. Bernard survived. His spine did not heal correctly. Chronic pain settled into his lower back and never left. He walked with a slowness that had not been there before. He still opened the shop 6 days a week. He still stood behind the chair, but he stood differently now. Like a man whose body had learned something his mind refused to accept. 2 years after the beating, the building that housed Washington's barbershop was sold to a real estate development company. Bernard received a notice. 60 days to vacate. He did not have the money to lease a new location. He did not have the credit. He did not have the body. The shop closed on a Wednesday in March. Bernard carried the sign home under his arm. He walked the 4 blocks slowly. He did not look back at the building. Bernard Washington died when Rochelle was 31. The death certificate said congestive heart failure. That was the medical language. The other language, the one that did not fit on a form, was 19 years of pain that never stopped a livelihood taken without recourse, a dignity stripped in front of a green door, while his daughter watched from a window and nobody on the form block said a word. Rochelle did not talk about her father often. She kept one thing, the sign, Washington's. Hand-painted on wood her father had sanded himself. It sat on the highest shelf in the living room of the apartment on Westmoreland Street, too high for Kendrick to reach. She had never told him what it was. She had never explained why it was there. It was not a decoration. It was not a memory. It was the reason she could not walk away from a man bleeding on concrete in a parking lot at 11:47 at night. She had heard that sound before. She had watched it happen before. And she had watched what happened when nobody showed up. Adrian Clark was 44 years old. He grew up in West Philadelphia in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on 52nd Street. His mother, Lenora, was a registered nurse who worked double shifts at Presbyterian Hospital for 23 years. She raised Adrian alone. She never explained where his father was. He never asked. The absence was a room in their apartment that both of them walked past without opening the door. Adrian was smart in the way that teachers notice and then forget about, because smart without resources does not fit the pipeline they are trained to feed. But his mother did not forget. She worked the doubles so he could attend a prep school in the suburbs. He took 2 buses each morning, 1 hour and 14 minutes each way. He did this for 6 years without missing a day. Full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania. Full scholarship to Penn Law. He graduated near the top of his class. He was recruited by Collins Whitfield and Pratt, one of the largest litigation firms in Philadelphia. Starting salary, $190,000 a year. He worked there for 7 years. Corporate litigation, contract disputes, mergers. The kind of law where the arguments were clean and the stakes were measured in quarterly earnings reports. He was good at it. He was efficient. He processed information the way the firm needed it processed, translated into the language of liability and exposure and risk mitigation. He was promoted twice. In his 7th year, the firm assigned him a pro bono case. They did this once a year for associates on the partner track. It looked good in the annual report. The case was straightforward. A 74-year-old woman named Hattie Combs had been evicted from her home of 31 years. The building had been purchased by a development company. She had been given a 60-day notice. She had nowhere to go. Adrian took the case. He reviewed the file. Then he requested the files for the 14 other tenants in the same building who had received the same notice. Then he requested the files for the 33 tenants in 3 other buildings owned by the same company. Then he pulled the public records for every property transaction that company had executed in the last decade. He found 47 cases, then 90, then 200. The pattern was the same every time. A development company called Grayson Palmer Development Group would purchase distressed mortgage debt from small landlords in black neighborhoods across North Philadelphia. Once they held the debt, they would file code violation complaints against the properties, violations that often did not exist before the company filed them. The violations triggered inspections. The inspections triggered citations. The citations triggered legal proceedings. The legal proceedings made the properties uninhabitable on paper. The owners could not afford to litigate. They sold at a fraction of the value. Grayson Palmer demolished the buildings and developed condominiums. Leonard Palmer was the principal owner of Grayson Palmer, 58 years old. He had purchased and demolished more than 60 buildings in North Philadelphia over 15 years. He sat on the board of a community development nonprofit. He gave money to a children's hospital. He attended fundraising dinners where people shook his hand and then called him a builder. Adrian left Collins, Whitfield, and Pratt. He did not leave in anger. He left the way Rochelle had left the bus stop the night of the assault, because he had seen something and his body moved toward it before his mind could calculate the cost. He opened Westbrook Legal Aid Clinic 12 years before the night he was beaten in a parking lot, one rented room on the second floor of a building on Westbrook Street. He specialized in housing discrimination and tenant rights. He charged nothing. His income came from grants, small donations, and one anonymous annual contribution that arrived every January from a trust he could not trace. He did not know who sent it. He had tried to find out twice and failed both times. For 12 years, Adrian had been building a case against Grayson Palmer. Every transaction, every eviction, every fabricated violation, every family displaced. 200 pages of documentation cross-referenced and annotated in handwriting so precise it looked like typeset. The file in his briefcase the night of the assault was the final compilation. He had been on his way to meet an investigative journalist at a coffee shop on Spring Garden Street. The meeting was scheduled for midnight. The journalist worked nights. Adrian did not drive. He took the bus. He walked the last 6 blocks. He never reached the coffee shop. The 3 men who beat him in that parking lot did not say Palmer's name. They did not say anything at all. But the assault occurred 72 hours after Adrian had mailed a formal document request to Leonard Palmer's legal counsel demanding the production of internal financial records for Grayson Palmer Development. The document request was the first step in a civil lawsuit that Adrian had spent 12 years preparing. The request had been sent by certified mail. Palmer's counsel had signed for it on a Monday morning. On Thursday night, Adrian Clark was on the ground in a parking lot with 4 broken ribs and a collapsed lung and a briefcase full of everything Palmer did not want anyone to see, lying 5 meters from his head. Nobody had come for him in the hospital because there was nobody to come. The clinic had no staff. The apartment had no roommate. The emergency contact number belonged to his mother. Lenora had died 14 months earlier. Adrian had not updated the form. He had not been able to bring himself to replace her number with someone else's, so the line rang and connected to nothing. A dead woman's phone, still listed as the person to call when everything went wrong. The following Thursday, Rochelle walked to her car at 10:10 in the evening. The car was parked where it was always parked, in front of the building on Westmoreland Street, under the streetlight that worked half the time and was dark the other half. Tonight, it was working. She saw the paper before she reached the door. A single sheet folded once and tucked under the windshield wiper on the driver's side. She stopped walking. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she pulled it out. It was not a letter. It was not a threat in the way people imagine threats. There were no words in capital letters, no warnings, no demands. It was a list. Her home address, 221 Westmoreland Street, Apartment B. Her son's name, Kendrick Deshaun Washington. His school, Barton Elementary. The time he left for school each morning, 7:28. The time he arrived home, 5:34. The name of the woman who walked him, Odessa Ruth Washington. Her work schedule, night shift, Temple University Hospital, 10:30 to 6:15. 5 nights per week. Every detail correct, every number exact. Somebody had watched her family long enough to learn the rhythm of their lives and had written it down the way a person writes down inventory. No emotion, no language of violence. Just data, clean and complete, and specific enough to say, we know where your son is at every hour of every day without using those words at all. Rochelle read it. Her hands did not shake. She had felt this before. The feeling of being watched. The feeling of someone knowing where you are when you do not know where they are. She had felt it when the men came for her father. She had felt it in the days after the beating when strange cars parked on Gavin Street and nobody explained why. She knew this feeling. She had survived it before. But before the paper would have had her father's name on it, not her son's. She folded the paper once along the original crease. She put it in the left pocket of her coat, the same pocket where the broken glasses had been sitting for 10 days. The glasses and the paper rested against each other, one from the man she had saved, one from the people who wanted her to stop. She got in the car. She drove to the hospital. She did not call Holloway. Not yet. She needed to think. She needed to decide what the paper changed and what it did not. During her shift, she walked past the ICU at 2:14 in the morning. Adrian was still there, still unconscious, the monitors still beeping in their quiet rhythm. The file had been returned to the hospital by the police department. It was not evidence in the assault case. It was personal property. It sat on the table beside his bed. 200 pages, tabbed, highlighted, waiting for someone to open it. Rochelle stood outside the glass for 4 seconds. She did not go in. She looked at the file. She looked at the man. She thought about the paper in her pocket, with her son's name printed on it in neat handwriting by someone who had never met Kendrick, but knew exactly when he walked out the front door every morning. She turned and walked back to her floor. She finished her shift. She drove home. She did not sleep. Monday morning, 7:15. Odessa took Kendrick downstairs while Rochelle slept. This was the routine. Odessa walked him to school every morning, 4 blocks east, right on Clearfield. Left on 5th, the school was on the corner. She had made this walk with him for 2 years. She knew every crack in the sidewalk. She knew which houses had dogs that barked through windows and which had front steps where men sat and nodded good morning without being asked. She was holding Kendrick's hand when she saw the man. He was across the street, black jacket, standing still. He was not walking. He was not waiting for a bus. He was holding a phone in front of his face at an angle that pointed directly at Kendrick. Odessa's hand tightened. She did not stop walking. She did not change her pace. She kept moving east on Westmoreland toward Clearfield with her grandson's hand in hers and her eyes on the man across the street. The man lowered the phone when he saw her looking. He turned. He walked north. He did not run. He walked with the ease of someone who had gotten what he came for. Kendrick looked up at his grandmother. "Grandma, you are squeezing." She loosened her grip. She did not explain. She walked him to school. She watched him go through the front door. She watched the door close behind him. She stood on the sidewalk for 90 seconds after the door closed, looking north, looking south, looking at every car parked on the block. Then she walked home. When Rochelle woke at 1 in the afternoon, Odessa was sitting at the kitchen table. The table was clean. No food, no coffee, no newspaper, just Odessa, sitting, waiting. Her hands folded in front of her in the way hands fold when they have been folded for a long time. She told Rochelle what she had seen. She described the man, the jacket, the phone, the angle. She described the way he lowered it and walked away. She described how she had held Kendrick's hand tighter without meaning to, and how he had noticed. Then she said what she had come to the table to say. Walk away from this. Walk away from it now, before something happens to that boy. Your father lost everything because nobody stood up for him. You do not have to lose everything because you are trying to stand up for somebody else. The sentence landed in the kitchen like something dropped from height. It was not wrong. Nothing in it was wrong. It was built from love and fear and 21 years of watching what happened to people who put themselves between power and the ground it wanted to stand on. Rochelle did not answer. She stood up from the table. She walked to the hook by the front door. Kendrick's backpack was hanging there, blue, faded at the straps. The zipper pull that had broken 3 months ago. She had stitched it back together with surgical thread from the supply closet at Temple. 2 clean loops through the nylon. Tight, neat, holding. She ran her finger along the thread. She stood there with her hand on the backpack and did not move. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She stood in the hallway of her apartment, touching the stitches she had made on the only backpack her son owned, and said nothing. Odessa watched her from the kitchen table. She did not ask again. She had said what she needed to say. The rest belonged to Rochelle. 2 weeks after the assault, Adrian Clark was moved from the ICU to a standard room on the 4th floor. He could speak. His voice came out in pieces. Rough, low, like something that had been unused for too long and had forgotten its own shape. His left eye was still swollen half shut. The cheekbone beneath it was healing, but the bruising had spread down into his jaw and turned the color of something old and unresolved. He had been told what happened. The police had come. The doctors had explained the injuries. He knew the file had been recovered. He knew someone had called 911. He knew a woman had stayed. He did not know her name until a nurse mentioned it. Rochelle. She works nights on the 3rd floor. She was the one at the bus stop. Rochelle came to his room at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. She had just finished her shift. She was still in her scrubs. She carried a small Ziploc bag in her left hand. Inside the bag were the glasses. One lens cracked through the center. The frame bent at the bridge. She stood in the doorway. He was sitting up in bed. The file was on the table beside him. 200 pages. She had seen it through the glass 14 days ago. Now it was 3 feet from where she stood. She walked to the bedside table. She placed the Ziploc bag on it. She did not say anything. She did not know what to say to a man whose face she had held off the pavement while his blood soaked through the knees of her scrubs. Adrian looked at the bag. He looked at the glasses inside it. Then he looked at her. You were there. He said it flat. Not a question. A statement. The way a person names something they have already confirmed. I was there, she said. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped at their intervals. A cart rolled past in the hallway. Adrian looked at her for a long time, not studying her, recognizing something. The look of a man who had spent 12 years watching what happened to people who got involved in things that powerful men wanted left alone. The people who did this do not stop at one message, he said. Rochelle did not move. She did not ask how he knew about the note. She did not ask what he meant by one message. She understood. She had understood since the night she found the paper on her windshield. You should walk away from this, he said. You have a son. She looked at the glasses on the table. One lens cracked. The frame bent where someone had stepped on it. She had carried them in her coat pocket for 2 weeks. They had rested against the folded paper with her son's name on it. 2 objects in one pocket. One from the man she had knelt beside. One from the people who wanted her silence. My father got beaten in front of our house when I was 12, she said. Nobody came forward, nobody testified, nobody did anything. She paused. I was there, Mr. Clark. I am not walking away. Adrian did not say thank you. He did not say she was brave. He looked at her, the way one person looks at another, when they recognize a decision that has already been made and cannot be unmade by argument. Then you need to know what this is really about, he said. He looked at the file on the table beside the glasses. She did not open it, not that morning, but she looked at it, and she understood that whatever was inside those 200 pages was the reason 3 men had beaten a stranger in a parking lot, and the reason someone knew her son's name, and the reason she was standing in a hospital room at 6:30 in the morning across from a man she had never spoken to before this moment. She left the room, she walked down the hall, she clocked out, she drove home, she made breakfast for Kendrick, she walked him to school, she came back to the apartment and lay down on the sofa and closed her eyes and did not sleep. The glasses stayed on the bedside table. Adrian did not put them away. He left them there, in the Ziploc bag, where he could see them. The phone rang at 2 in the morning on a Thursday. Not Rochelle's phone, the landline. The one Odessa kept because she did not trust a cell phone to work in an emergency, and because she had grown up in a house where the phone was bolted to the kitchen wall, and that was where it stayed. Odessa answered on the third ring. She had been asleep for 2 hours. She picked up the receiver and said hello in the voice of a woman who expected bad news because at 2 in the morning, that is the only kind of news that calls. Nobody spoke. There was breathing on the other end. Steady, unhurried. The breathing of someone who was not nervous. Someone who had made this call before. Odessa said hello again. The breathing continued. She hung up. She did not go back to sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for 40 minutes. She listened to the apartment. She listened to Kendrick breathing through the thin wall. She listened to the street. At 2:43, she got up and checked the front door lock. It was locked. She checked it again. Then she went back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed until morning. When Rochelle came home at 6:15, Odessa was already at the table. She told her about the call. She said it in a voice Rochelle had not heard before, not the voice that said walk away from this. A different one. Older. The voice of a woman who had answered a phone call 19 years ago and been told her husband was on the ground outside their front door and that someone should come. The voice that had been waiting since then for the pattern to repeat. At the hospital that afternoon, a woman named Denise, from the third-floor nursing staff, stopped Rochelle in the break room. Denise had worked at Temple for 11 years. She was not a friend. She was not an enemy. She was the kind of colleague who remembered birthdays and never asked personal questions. "You have got a kid, Rochelle. Think about what you are doing." She said it while stirring her coffee. She did not look up. She said it the way people say things they believe are helpful and do not want to be held accountable for. Rochelle did not answer. She poured her own coffee. She went back to the floor. On her way home that evening, a neighbor on the first floor of the building caught her in the stairwell. A woman named Gail who had lived there for 9 years and who had never spoken to Rochelle beyond hello and comments about the weather. "I heard you are going to court," Gail said. "I hope you know what you are doing." She said it with the face of someone who cared, and she meant it as care. But care that asks you to stop is not the same as care that helps you continue. The prosecutor's name was Waverly. He met Rochelle in a conference room at the district attorney's office on a Wednesday afternoon. He was direct. 3 suspects had been identified. Charges were being prepared. But the case depended on her testimony. The physical evidence was limited. The security camera had been down. The other witnesses had declined. Rochelle was the only person who had seen the faces. He said it plainly. If you withdraw, the case collapses. He also said something else, something he was not required to say but said anyway. "I cannot guarantee your safety beyond what the law provides, and the law provides very little for witnesses." Rochelle left the office. She walked to her car. She sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes. She did not start the engine. She sat there and thought about a phone that rang at 2 in the morning and a coworker who would not look her in the eye and a neighbor who spoke to her for the first time in 9 years only to suggest she stop. She started the car. She drove to pick up Kendrick. She took a different route than usual, 2 blocks longer, past streets she did not normally drive on. She parked in a different spot than the one she always used. She checked the windshield before she got out. Nothing there. She checked anyway. That night, she tested every window lock in the apartment. She moved her phone from the cushion beside the sofa to under her pillow. She set the volume to maximum. She lay in the dark, with the phone pressed against the underside of the cotton, and stared at the ceiling. She did not call Holloway. She did not call Waverly. She did not call anyone. She just changed the way she moved through the world by small increments that no one would notice unless they were counting. And she was counting. Wednesday night. Rochelle was putting Kendrick to bed. The same routine. Teeth. Pajamas. One chapter of a book about a boy who could talk to animals that Kendrick had been reading for 3 weeks because he liked to go back and reread the parts where the animals said things adults would never say. She pulled the blanket up. She kissed his forehead. She reached for the lamp. "Mom, if something happens to you, does Grandma keep me, or do I go somewhere else?" He said it without looking at her. He said it to the ceiling, the way children ask questions they have been carrying for days and release at the last possible moment before sleep, because darkness makes hard questions easier to say. Rochelle did not move her hand from the lamp. She held it there. She looked at her son, 8 years old, asking a question that contained the full weight of everything she had been afraid of since the night she knelt beside a man in a parking lot. He had not asked why she was checking the windows. He had not asked why the route to school was different. He had not asked why his grandmother held his hand so tight it hurt. He had noticed all of it, and he had translated it into the only question that mattered to an 8-year-old whose world was his mother and his grandmother and a blue backpack with a zipper stitched shut with surgical thread. "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said. She turned off the lamp. She sat with him until his breathing changed. Then she went to the living room. The sofa was already made up, the blanket folded at one end, the pillow in its place. She sat down. She picked up her phone. She opened the contacts. She scrolled to Holloway. The number was right there. One tap. One sentence. "I want to withdraw my statement." That was all it would take. The case would collapse. The threats would stop. Kendrick would walk to school on the old route. Odessa would sleep through the night. The phone would stop being a weapon under her pillow and go back to being a phone. She sat with the number on the screen. She thought about Kendrick in foster care. She thought about the backpack with the broken zipper and no one to fix it. She thought about what Odessa had said. "Your father lost everything because nobody stood up for him. You do not have to lose everything because you are trying to stand up for somebody else." Her mother was right. By every measure of logic and self-preservation, her mother was right. Rochelle looked up. The top shelf, the one Kendrick could not reach, the wooden sign. Washington's. In the dark, she could not read the letters, but she knew they were there. She had known they were there every night for 2 years. Her father had carried that sign home under his arm on the day the shop closed. He had walked 4 blocks slowly. He had placed it on a shelf and never explained it. He had opened that shop at 6:30 every morning for 14 years. Not because every morning was a good morning, because he showed up, because showing up was what he had, because the act of being present in a place that belonged to him was the only statement he knew how to make about who he was. Rochelle looked at the sign in the dark. She looked at the phone in her hand. She put the phone face down on the cushion beside her. She did not call Holloway. She did not call anyone. She pulled the blanket over her legs and lay back and stared at the ceiling in the same apartment where her son had just asked what would happen to him if she disappeared. She did not sleep, but she did not call. Rochelle woke at 4:30 on the morning of the trial. The apartment was dark. Kendrick was asleep. Odessa was asleep. The building was quiet in the way buildings are quiet when the world inside them has not yet started. She went to the closet in the hallway. The white blouse was on a hanger at the back. She had bought it 4 years ago for the interview at Temple. $14 at a thrift store on Lehigh Avenue. She had tried on 3 blouses that day and chosen this one because the collar sat flat and the buttons did not pull across her chest, and it looked like it belonged to someone who had options. She set up the ironing board in the kitchen. She ironed the blouse at 4:45 in the morning, slowly, the way you iron something when it is the only version of it you own, and there is no replacement if you burn it. She pressed the collar. She pressed the sleeves. She hung it on the cabinet handle and looked at it. She made breakfast. Eggs. Toast. She set Kendrick's plate at the table. She poured his juice. She heard him get up. She heard his feet on the hallway floor. He came into the kitchen with his eyes half closed and his pajama shirt untucked on one side. He ate. She stood at the counter. He looked up. "Where are you going, Mom?" "To tell the truth." He chewed. He swallowed. He looked at her with the face of an 8-year-old who had been paying attention to everything for weeks and had organized it into a question he had been waiting for the right moment to ask. "Is that dangerous?" Rochelle looked at her son. She did not say no. She did not say, "Do not worry." She gave him the only answer she had ever been able to give him, that she knew she would not have to take back. Sometimes. He nodded. He went back to his eggs. He did not ask anything else. He had gotten the answer. The answer was honest. That was enough for him. Odessa stood in the hallway when Rochelle left. She did not say, "Good luck." She did not say, "Be careful." She did not say anything. She stood at the door and watched Rochelle walk down the stairs in the white blouse she had ironed at 4:45 in the morning. Her face held something that was not anger and not sadness. It was the look of a woman who had said everything she could say and had watched her daughter choose anyway. The rest was not hers to carry. The courthouse was on Filbert Street. Rochelle arrived at 8:47. She had never been inside a courthouse before. The metal detector beeped when she walked through. A guard waved a wand over her coat. She put her bag on the belt. She watched it go through the machine. She picked it up on the other side. The courtroom was on the 3rd floor. Room 314. Fluorescent lights. Wooden benches. The smell of floor cleaner and old paper and something else that had no name but existed in every room where people came to find out what would happen to them. The benches were hard. The ceiling was high. The windows were narrow and let in light that did not warm anything. The 3 defendants sat at a table on the left side of the room. They wore dress shirts. 2 of them looked straight ahead. The 3rd looked at the table. Rochelle recognized him immediately. The one who had turned. The one who had run through the circle of light under the street lamp. The one whose face she had seen for less than 3 seconds on a Tuesday night in November. He did not look at her. He looked at the table. Their attorney sat beside them. A man in a gray suit. Charcoal. Well-fitted. His shoes were polished to a shine that caught the fluorescent light. He leaned toward his clients and spoke in a whisper that carried the tone of someone who had done this many times and expected to do it many more. The kind of attorney that 3 men who beat a stranger in a parking lot in North Philadelphia should not have been able to afford. Somebody was paying for that suit. Somebody was paying for those shoes. The courtroom did not say who. It did not need to. Rochelle sat in the witness section. She placed her hands on her knees. She did not look around. She did not look at the defendants. She looked at the front of the room and waited. Prosecutor Waverly stood. He addressed the jury. He described the events of November 14th, the parking lot, the assault, the injuries. He displayed photographs of Adrian's face taken at the hospital. The fractured cheekbone, the swelling, the blood, he read from the medical report. 4 fractured ribs, a partially collapsed lung, mild traumatic brain injury, 3 hours and 11 minutes of surgery. He described the scene, the broken glasses, the torn briefcase strap, the single witness who had stayed. Rochelle was called to the stand. She stood up. She walked to the front of the courtroom. She placed her hand on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth. She sat down. Her back was straight. Her hands rested on the wooden rail of the witness box. Her voice when she spoke was clear. Not loud, not soft. The voice of a woman who had decided what she was going to say and was going to say it once and exactly. Waverly asked her to describe what happened. She did. 11:47 p.m. The bus stop on Germantown Avenue. The sound. Shoe soles on concrete. Rhythmic. Repeated. She stood up. She looked across the parking lot. 3 men. 1 man on the ground. She shouted. She ran toward them. They ran from her. She knelt beside the victim. She called 911. She stayed. Waverly asked if she could identify any of the attackers. She looked at the defense table. She pointed at the 3rd defendant, the one on the end, the one who had turned and run through the streetlight. She had seen his face for less than 3 seconds. But 3 seconds under a streetlight at 40 feet is enough when you are a woman who has spent 6 years reading faces in hospital rooms at night and knows what a face looks like when it is not expecting to be seen. The defense attorney stood. He buttoned his jacket. He walked toward the witness box with the measured pace of a man who had cross-examined 1,000 witnesses and believed that patience was a form of pressure. Miss Washington, you were approximately 40 feet from the assault. Is that correct? Yes. The only light source was a single street lamp. Is that correct? Yes. You were alone at a bus stop at nearly midnight in a neighborhood with a documented history of violent crime. Is that correct? Yes. Do you wear corrective lenses? No. Do you have any prior convictions? No. Did you know the victim before the night in question? No. He paused. He adjusted his cufflink. A small gesture. Deliberate. Miss Washington, you are a single mother. You work night shifts at a hospital. You were sitting at a bus stop alone at 11:47 at night. A violent assault was occurring 40 feet from where you sat. 3 men, 1 victim. The safest course of action. The reasonable course of action would have been to leave the area immediately and contact emergency services from a safe distance. That is what any reasonable person would do. So, I have to ask you, why did you not walk away? The courtroom was quiet. Rochelle looked at the attorney. She did not look at the jury. She did not look at the judge. She looked at the man who had asked the question. She paused. Not because she did not know the answer. Because the answer had been living inside her for 21 years, and this was the first time anyone had asked for it in a room where it would be recorded. Because I was there. The courtroom held the sentence. Nobody moved. The stenographer's fingers stopped. The judge did not speak. The attorney looked at Rochelle for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then he said no further questions. Adrian Clark was sitting in the 3rd row from the back. He had been discharged from the hospital 9 days earlier. His cheekbone was still healing. He held himself carefully, like a man whose ribs reminded him with every breath that they were not finished mending. He had come to the courthouse alone. He had taken 2 buses. He had sat down slowly. He had not spoken to anyone. He watched Rochelle step down from the witness stand. He watched her walk back to her seat. She did not look at him. She did not need to. She knew he was there the same way he knew she would not walk away. Some things do not require confirmation. They simply are. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 17 minutes. They returned at 3:22 in the afternoon. The foreman stood, guilty on all counts. All 3 defendants. The courtroom shifted. Waverly closed his folder. The judge read the sentencing guidelines. The defendants stood. The first 2 were led out through the side door without looking back. The 3rd one looked at Rochelle. Not with anger, not with threat. He simply looked at her the way a person looks at someone whose face they are committing to memory. Not because they plan to do something about it, because they want to remember who it was that stood between them and the version of the night where nobody saw anything. Then he was led through the door. It closed behind him. Rochelle sat in the courtroom for 3 minutes after it ended. She did not stand immediately. She sat with her hands on her knees and her back straight in the white blouse she had ironed at 4:45 that morning, and she let the room be empty around her. Then she stood. She walked out. Adrian was outside, leaning against the wall by the elevator. His breathing was careful. His coat hung loose on a frame that had lost weight during the weeks in the hospital. He looked at her. "Thank you." 2 words. He did not add anything. He did not explain what the words contained or how much of the last 12 years was folded into them. He just said it. And she heard it. She nodded. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She went home. She picked up Kendrick from school. She made dinner. She sat with him while he did his homework. She put him to bed. She folded the blanket on the sofa. She lay down. She slept. For the first night, in 5 weeks, she did not put the phone under her pillow. 3 days after the verdict, Detective Holloway asked Rochelle to meet her at a coffee shop on Girard Avenue near the hospital. It was a small place. 4 tables. A counter. The kind of shop where people came alone and stayed quiet. Holloway was already seated when Rochelle arrived. She had a file with her, not the 200-page file from Adrian's briefcase. A different one, thinner, official. She placed it on the table between them. The investigation did not end with a conviction, Holloway said. She said it the way she said everything, flat, direct, without decoration. One of the 3 defendants had changed his testimony after sentencing. He had agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. He confirmed what Adrian's file had suggested for 12 years. The assault was not random. It was arranged. Payment had been made through a subsidiary account connected to a company called Grayson Palmer Development Group. Holloway let the name sit on the table. She did not explain who Grayson Palmer was. She did not have to. The name would explain itself in the days that followed. She said the cooperation agreement had opened a new line of investigation. Financial records, payment trails, communication logs. The kind of evidence that only becomes available when someone inside the structure decides to talk. And someone had decided to talk because he had been convicted. And he had been convicted because a jury had believed the testimony of a single witness who had been at a bus stop at 11:47 on a Tuesday night and had chosen not to walk away. Holloway looked at Rochelle across the small table. Your testimony kept the case alive. If those 3 had walked free, there would be no conviction, no cooperation, no trail to follow. The file Adrian Clark spent 12 years building would have stayed in a briefcase that nobody opened. You kept the door open. Rochelle held her coffee. She had not taken a sip. She looked at the file on the table. She looked at Holloway. She did not know yet what was inside Adrian's 200-page file. She did not know that the company Holloway had just named had purchased and demolished 60 buildings in North Philadelphia over 15 years. She did not know that one of those buildings was on Gavin Street. She did not know that the address in that file matched the address of her father's barber shop. She did not know any of that yet. She just sat in a coffee shop on Girard Avenue 3 days after testifying in a courtroom and understood for the first time that the night she knelt beside a bleeding man in a parking lot, she had not only saved a person, she had saved the evidence. And the evidence was still moving. 2 weeks after the verdict, Adrian Clark came to the apartment on Westmoreland Street. It was the first time he had been there. He climbed the stairs slowly. His ribs were still healing. He carried the file under his arm. 200 pages. The same file that had been in his briefcase the night he was beaten. The same file that had sat on his hospital bedside table. The same file the police had bagged and returned, and that nobody had opened that first night because nobody knew what it contained. Now he was bringing it to a kitchen table in North Philadelphia, to a woman who had testified for him, because she needed to see what was inside it. Rochelle opened the door. Odessa was behind her. The apartment smelled like tea. Kendrick was at school. The kitchen table was clear. Adrian sat down. He placed the file on the table. He opened it. He did not rush. He explained it the way a man explains something he has spent 12 years learning. Grayson Palmer Development Group. Leonard Palmer. The method. It was always the same method. Buy distressed debt from small property owners. File fabricated code violations against the buildings. Trigger inspections. Trigger citations. Trigger legal proceedings that made the properties uninhabitable on paper. The owners could not afford lawyers. They sold at fractions of value. Palmer demolished. Palmer built condominiums. Palmer attended charity dinners and shook hands with people who called him a builder. 60 buildings in 15 years. Hundreds of families. The addresses filled pages. Each one a line in a spreadsheet. Each one a home that used to hold people and now held nothing. Adrian turned the pages. Rochelle followed. She read the addresses. She read the names. She read the dates. Block after block of North Philadelphia reduced to entries in a file. Acquisition date. Demolition date. Development permit number. The language of real estate applied to the erasure of a community. She turned to page 47. The entries were alphabetical by street. She scanned the column. Her finger moved down the page. 1614 Gavin Street. Washington's barber shop. Owner Bernard T. Washington. Acquisition date March 14, 2010. Enforcement action code violation filing April 2010. Eviction order June 2010. Demolition September 2010. Executing entity Grayson Palmer Development LLC. Rochelle's finger stopped on the page. It rested on her father's name, on the letters that spelled out the place where he had cut hair for 14 years, where he had kept books on a shelf by the window, where he had read after closing while the radio played low, the place he had carried home on a wooden sign under his arm on the day it was taken from him. She did not look up. She did not speak. Her finger stayed on the name, Bernard T. Washington, printed in the same font as every other name on the page, one line among hundreds. One man among the displaced. One barbershop among the demolished. Reduced to an entry in a file that a man had spent 12 years compiling in a rented room on the second floor of an old building. Adrian did not speak. He had found the entry while reviewing the file in his hospital bed. He had seen the name. He had seen the address. He had looked at the Westbrook legal aid records and found that 1614 Gavin Street had been flagged as a case of predatory acquisition 7 years ago. He had not known then that the owner's daughter was the woman who had knelt beside him in a parking lot. He had not known until Holloway told him her full name, and he ran it against the file. He had known for 2 weeks. He had waited until now to show her. Odessa was sitting at the end of the table. She had been quiet since Adrian arrived. She had poured the tea. She had sat down. She had watched Rochelle turn the pages. Now she looked at the page where Rochelle's finger had stopped. "That was his shop," she said. Her voice was low, not a whisper, lower than a whisper. The voice of a woman who had just seen her dead husband's name in a document that proved what she had always known but never had the words for. That what happened to Bernard was not bad luck. It was not the economy. It was not fate. It was a man named Palmer who had decided that Gavin Street was worth more without the people who lived on it. Rochelle looked up. Her eyes were dry. Whatever was happening behind them was larger than tears. It was the recognition of a line that ran through 21 years of her life. Her father beaten outside the green door, the shop closing, the sign carried home, the chronic pain, the slow decline, the funeral, the years after, the night shifts, the sofa that folded into a bed, the bus stop at 11:47, the sound of shoes on concrete, the man on the ground, the courtroom, the threat, the paper with her son's name on it, all of it, every piece of it, laid out on a single line that began with a company deciding that her father's barber shop was an obstacle to profit. "I was there," Rochelle said. 3 words. The same 3 words she had said in the hospital room. The same 3 words she had said on the witness stand. But this time, the word there did not mean the parking lot. It did not mean the courtroom. It meant Gavin Street. It meant the window of her childhood bedroom. It meant every morning her father opened the shop at 6:30, and every evening he closed it, and every Sunday he read his books by the window. She had always been there. Long before the night, at the bus stop. Long before she knew why the sound of shoes on concrete made her body move before her mind could stop it. She had been there since she was 12 years old, watching through glass as her father lay on the ground and nobody came. Adrian closed the file. He did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say. The file had said it. Odessa reached across the table. She placed her hand on Rochelle's hand, the hand that was still resting on page 47. On the name. She did not say, "Walk away." She did not say, "Be careful." She held her daughter's hand on her husband's name and said nothing. The anonymous contribution that had kept Westbrook Legal Aid Clinic open for 12 years came from a trust administered by a woman named Evelyn Cartwright. She was 56 years old, managing partner at Collins Whitfield and Pratt, the same firm Adrian had left 12 years earlier. Evelyn had watched Adrian leave the firm without trying to stop him. She had understood why he left. She had also understood that understanding was not the same as leaving herself. She stayed. She made partner. She built the litigation division into something that generated $42 million in annual revenue. And every January she authorized a transfer from a personal trust to an organization called Westbrook Legal Aid Clinic. The amount was enough to cover rent and basic operations. Not enough to trace easily. Not enough for Adrian to identify the source. He would have refused if he knew, she told Holloway later. He refuses everything that feels like charity. He only accepts what he has earned. So I made sure it looked earned. When Evelyn learned that Adrian had been assaulted, she did not call him. She called Holloway first. Then she called her litigation team. 9 attorneys, full resources, pro bono. She did not ask the firm's board for permission. She informed them after the fact. She said it was the right thing to do. She also said it was good for the firm's profile. Both things were true. She led with the second one because she knew which argument the board responded to. The civil lawsuit against Leonard Palmer and Grayson Palmer Development was filed 3 months after the criminal conviction. Class action, 340 plaintiff families, 12 years of documentation, 200 pages of evidence, compiled by a man who had taken 2 buses to work every day and charged nothing for his services. The case lasted 7 months. Palmer's defense relied on the argument that every transaction had been conducted within the boundaries of the law. That code violations had been reported in good faith. That property acquisitions had followed standard market procedures. That the displacement of hundreds of families was simply the cost of urban development. The forensic accountants disagreed. The fabricated code violations were documented in internal communications that Palmer's legal team had failed to redact completely. The predatory lending patterns were mapped across 15 years of financial records. The connection between Palmer and the 3 men who had assaulted Adrian was established through the cooperation agreement. Palmer lost everything. The company, the assets, the board seat on the community development nonprofit, the invitations to the charity dinners, the handshake, the word builder, all of it stripped away in the clean documentary language of court filings and financial settlements. 340 families received compensation. Not enough to undo 15 years. Not enough to rebuild 60 buildings. Not enough to bring back the businesses that had closed, or the people who had moved away, or the years that had been spent in smaller apartments in other neighborhoods, waiting for something that felt like home. But enough to say what happened to you was not weather. It was not fate. It was a decision made by a man in an office. And that decision has a cost. Odessa received a letter from the legal team on a Tuesday afternoon. She opened it at the kitchen table. The letter referenced 1614 Gavin Street. It referenced Bernard T. Washington. It referenced the settlement amount allocated to the estate. Her hands shook as she held the paper. Not because of the money, because the letter contained a sentence she had waited 21 years to read. A sentence that said what happened to her husband's business was not the result of economic conditions or personal misfortune. It was the result of unlawful predatory acquisition by Grayson Palmer Development, LLC. Someone had finally said it in writing. Someone had said it in the language that mattered. The language of the law. The same law that had done nothing for Bernard on a night in October when his daughter screamed from a window and his neighbors closed their curtains. Rochelle visited Adrian at the clinic on a Thursday afternoon. The room on the 2nd floor of the old building on Westbrook Street. 1 desk, filing cabinets, a window that faced a brick wall. He had been back at work for 3 weeks, moving slowly, but moving. She saw the glasses on his desk. The broken pair. 1 lens cracked through the center. The frame bent at the bridge. They were in the same Ziploc bag she had brought to his hospital room. He had placed them on the corner of the desk near the window. Not in a drawer, not in a box, on the desk, where he could see them. "You kept them," she said. "You came," he said. Not "you came back." Because Rochelle had not come back. She had come once, on a night in November at a bus stop at 11:47. She had come once, and she had not left. That was the whole of it. Not a return, an arrival. A single decision that held everything else together. She looked at the glasses on the desk. She looked at the file cabinets full of 12 years of work. She looked at the man sitting behind the desk, with ribs that were still mending and a cheekbone that would never sit quite right again. She did not say, "You are welcome." She did not say, "It was nothing." She looked at the broken glasses on the desk of a one-room legal aid clinic on the second floor of an old building in North Philadelphia, and she understood that some objects hold more than they were made to carry. A pair of glasses, a wooden sign, a backpack with a zipper stitched shut with surgical thread. She left the clinic. She walked to the bus stop. She waited for the 47. She rode home. She picked up Kendrick from school. She made dinner. She checked the windows out of habit. She folded the blanket on the sofa. She lay down. She slept. Leonard Palmer demolished 60 buildings. He displaced hundreds of families. He purchased distressed debt and manufactured code violations and filed eviction orders and turned neighborhoods into spreadsheets. He hired 3 men to beat a lawyer in a parking lot to stop an investigation that threatened 15 years of profit. He sat on a nonprofit board. He attended fundraising galas. He shook hands with mayors. The world called him a developer. Rochelle Washington stood at a bus stop at 11:47 at night. She saw a man being beaten. She ran toward it. She stayed. She gave her name to the police. She agreed to testify. She received a note on her windshield with her son's daily schedule written on it. She received a phone call at 2 in the morning with nothing on the other end but breathing. She watched a man photograph her 8-year-old on the way to school. She heard her own mother beg her to stop. She heard her coworker tell her to think about what she was doing. She sat in the dark with a phone in her hand and her son's question in her ears and came within one tap of walking away from all of it. She did not walk away. She stood in a courtroom and said 3 words. The world has a word for people who tell the truth when telling the truth is dangerous. It does not always have a word for the people who make telling the truth dangerous. Think about which one deserves your attention. Somewhere in your city right now, someone saw something. They are sitting with what they saw. They are weighing the cost of speaking up against the cost of staying quiet. They do not know if anyone will stand with them. They do not know if the system will protect them. They do not know if their name will end up on a piece of paper under someone's windshield wiper. You might not be a witness in a courtroom, but every single day you choose whether to look or to look away. Every day you decide whether the person standing alone stays alone. Witness intimidation is one of the leading causes of case collapse in the American criminal justice system. Exposed witnesses in violent crime cases routinely face threats, harassment, and retaliation. Many recant, many disappear. The cases die with their silence. Housing discrimination through predatory lending and manufactured code violations continues in cities across the United States. The neighborhoods change. The methods do not. If this story reminded you that courage is not always loud, that sometimes it is just showing up, just staying, send it to someone who needs to hear that. If it made you angry that a man who dismantled neighborhoods for 15 years walked free while a woman who told the truth had to fear for her child's safety, good. Anger without direction is noise. Anger with direction is change. This story is fictional, but witness intimidation is real. Housing discrimination is real. The courage it takes to testify when your son's name is on a piece of paper in your coat pocket is real. I wrote this because the people who show up and stay rarely get the story told about them. They do not ask for it. They do not expect it. They just keep showing up. This is for them. Subscribe now. See you in the next one.